The video you're about to see is from the Outlier Podcast Festival, Salt Lake, that was just a couple of weeks ago here in Salt Lake City. I had the opportunity to moderate and put together a couple of panels for the event. It was a great event, surrounded by fellow introverts that we just love to tell stories and make content. So in the video you're about to see, this is a video with the diversity panel. We're talking about diversity in the audio landscape, but also representation. Shout out to my friends Patricia, Amanda, Mike, and Branden for joining me on the panel as panelists. Ever and Ariel with Outlier, thank you so much for putting on the event. Like I said, it was really awesome. And to anybody else that we were able to connect with at the event, really grateful for all of you. So it was great to see all of you and get to know all of you, and I hope to keep this dialogue going in the future here. So with that being said, thanks for tuning in and enjoy the panel. Okay, I think we're just going to jump into it here. We're going to talk about diversity, obviously, because I'm Asian. I don't know if you guys knew, but... So before we get started, I want to kind of go down the panel. I would like you guys to introduce yourselves, talk about your show, what projects you work on, and something we don't know about you.
All right, well, my name is Branden Ushio. My show is the Fandom Podcast. We talk about all things geeky and nerdy and just kind of have a good time there. I'm also one of the organizers of the Utah Podcast Summit. And one thing that almost nobody knows about me is for a semester, I was a junior high cheerleading coach.
Yes.
I took over for a math teacher who was also the cheerleading coach, and they couldn't change the schedule at that point, so we hired somebody else, but I was the adult in charge.
The Fandom Podcast?
The Fandom Podcast.
My name is Mike Lyman. I'm a local to Utah. My podcast is Drive By Dating. It actually has not been released yet. Still in the process, working with Salt City Garage as a little plug for your garage. But we'll be releasing here hopefully within the next couple of months. Something about me that most people don't know is I actually have a side project that I do outside of this that is actually woodworking. So I build furniture and things like that.
Yay, that's cool. Thanks for having me, Raj. I'm Amanda Jones, and I've been in local media for just over a decade. That makes me sound so old. I've done pretty much every job in media, from assignment desk editor at the TV news to a newspaper reporter to music editor, and experienced radio for a time, a couple of years. Right now I'm on Fox 13's lifestyle show called The Place, and it's an amazing place where we can feature local people. Raj was on there promoting how to start your podcast, and I'm kind of a professional failure. I feel like I've just clawed my way into any job I've managed to get. I've tried a lot, like cheerleading. That kind of triggered me because I tried every year for 4 years to get on the cheerleading squad and did not ever make it. But I'm resilient, right?
You just have to become a math teacher.
There you go. So I feel for what I call the little guy and the unheard, and we just do what we can in media to be an ambassador for any particular group. So I'm so glad that Raj is putting this together. Thank you.
Okay, hi, I'm Patricia, and my business is called The Podcast Maven. So I edit podcasts. Most of my clientele are women, and that works well. We kind of understand each other, and I get where they stumble and some of the blocks that they go through to get to producing their podcast. I fell into podcasting about 5 years ago, so it wasn't planned like you. It was like just kind of accidental, and I found out I'm good at it, and I can work from home and do my own hours, so that's perfect. Odd fact about me is, I never wear matching socks. Like, not on purpose, but after you buy them, they never seem to meet again. So it's
disappeared.
Yeah, they do. That's like and it never really bothered me until I went to Thailand, and you have to take off your shoes everywhere, and people are like. So, but other than that, yeah, Moving on.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Patricia. Thank you, everyone. This is great. This is great getting to know you. So obviously, strategically, I wanted us to obviously be a diverse group in here, to have a diverse conversation. But before we get into the actual ethnicity or our backgrounds of that representation, I'm curious to know, and anyone can answer this, is when you were deciding to choose your show, your project that you're working on, you decided to devote so much time to that. Why did you choose the topic or the genre that you did?
Mine's pretty easy. I was talking to my wife, telling her about some superhero news thing that was happening, and she told me, if you talk to me about that one more time, I'm going to throw this comic book at you. And so that's why I chose the topic. Right?
It's like a therapy. You gotta let it out somewhere. Right?
And I just can't keep it pent up. And I love my wife, and so I want to stay married.
Good man. Smart man.
Mine was more of, so drive-by dating, I talk about dating quite a bit. I was married, no longer married, went through divorce, and dating during that time frame changed drastically. And especially here in Utah, where dating is considerably different than most anywhere else in the country. And it's like, okay, let's try and see what it's like, be able to show it is okay to be in your 30s and single and in the dating scene, and just see how that kind of progresses.
Cool. Why did you choose to be on a lifestyle show? You were...
Did I choose, or was it the only option available?
You were dedicated. You made it happen.
I finally got a job. Like, I finally got the job that I thought I would have had 10 years ago. But no, it took me a while to get on my own show, I would say. But I really love this one in particular. It's nothing like I've ever worked on, because I worked on Channel 2's lifestyle show, and I worked on radio, morning radio. And I felt really stifled at the previous media outlets that I worked at. I was a guest booker, I was a producer, and I had this story from Channel 2. We were booking Sundance guests, and I was the main guest booker at the time. And there was an amazing documentary about someone transitioning from female to male. And so I had that person on our show, and it was the noon show. And I remember after the segment, my executive producer came over and he said, "Did you book that?" And I said, "Yes." And he's like, "That's a little too edgy for our audience." I was like, I could not compute. I think I was born with something that just says, what's wrong with that? I don't know. But, general attitudes, especially being in Utah, it's really kind of interesting to see what is considered an okay guest to have on and what is kind of blacklisted. And I was not comfortable with that. And that was the same with the morning radio show I was on. It was kind of like I was kind of under the main guy, and he just had his idea of what our demographic was, who we were talking to every day. And I just couldn't get it past my brain that, our main demographic is this, but what about these listeners? What about these listeners? I don't like anybody being pushed to the margins. So on what show am I on now? The Plays. My co-host is Big Buddha, and he is amazing in that he represents the Pacific Islanders in Utah, and he brings on restaurants that you wouldn't see on Channel 2. That many of us don't eat at, because you just don't hear, because maybe there's not the advertising dollars or the attitudes that we should try all different cultural foods. But he's amazing. That inspires me. I feel like I represent women of all shapes, sizes, color. Mental health is a big area for me, because I've struggled with depression, anxiety. So I feel like on our show, we are allowed to talk about these things. We are allowed to do feminist stories, racial stories, stories about being imperfect. And then we have the most diverse cast really on lifestyle TV in Utah, and that is not okay, because I'm still white. I'm still limited in my view, and we should have someone of color, like a woman of color, black woman of color, Asian woman, something like that, to give that Asian man, yes. Raj. But still, we see the barriers, because they were hiring that third co-host, and there was a certain barrier there, because we had all sorts of people apply, and who got it but another white woman, and that's already being represented. So I feel like we're making some progress at Fox 13 especially, but I feel like there's a lot more room to grow. I apologize for taking so much
You're
of your time.
Tell us about why did you choose the topic for the podcast Maven?
Okay, so that's my business, but I forgot to say because I just
sorry.
meandered that my podcast is called The Enterprising Expat.
There we go.
So, as an expat woman, you obviously will have different experiences in the places that you live in, and that also has opened my eyes to what diversity means. So, very quickly, I grew up in the UK, and quite frankly, where I grew up, there wasn't a discussion around color. It's not that it's ignored, it's just that it's as if people have kind of moved past it. So I am not the black woman in the room. So it's not something I grew up with. Then we moved to Southern Africa, and my first thoughts were like, I've never seen so many black people. It was weird for a couple of years. It was just weird. So back to the topic of my podcast, it's not about being a black woman experiencing other cultures. It's about being an expat. And I deliberately do not focus on the fact that it's about a black woman in another place, because I sometimes feel that can create a barrier. So the women I'm talking to are all alien in another place, and that is the point where I want us to come together and talk. And yes, maybe my experiences as a black woman in a certain place might be different from somebody who is Asian or Caucasian, and you need to create a place where we can all come together and express ourselves and be allowed to express ourselves, and just have the conversation without saying, well, I feel it worse, or yeah, you can't really say that's racist, or I feel the debate needs to be wider. So that is why I took that topic.
I love it. Thank you. I could listen to you talk all day too. I love that UK accent. So that's great. Which actually segues to the next portion of our discussion here is something that you touched on a lot, Evo, in your presentation. Was really great. Is your podcast your thing or your think? And I think that we see up here, there's a lot of representation in different topics, but there is an undertone as we all look different on the outside, right? And we all have different backgrounds, but we don't need to have that be the focus of what we actually represent. Taylor,
yes.
What's your podcast called?
Happiness Abound.
Happiness Abound. Would you do me a favor and read this blue highlighted area here? This is an article that was in Forbes after Black Panther came out about the representation of minorities.
Top blue or bottom blue? Or
Sorry,
both?
both blue parts, yeah.
A 2012 study looking at representation on TV and its impact on children's self-esteem had similar findings. In a survey of almost 400 black and white boys and girls, researchers found that the only demographic that didn't experience lower self-esteem after watching TV was white boys. They pointed to racial stereotypes and the way black characters were portrayed as one explanation. Black male characters are disproportionately shown as buffoons or as menacing or unruly youths, and black female characters are typically shown as exotic and sexually available, the authors wrote. The TV portrayals of white boys, on the other hand, were quite positive in nature. Even if it's a mindset of hers being shifted or a realization of how to experience and express her own ferocity and femininity, Garoa said, sorry, I jumped to the second part. Those sort of things, that sort of impact, if little girls have that and have images now to refer to that are cool and empowered and hip, that they can say, listen, I don't have to fall into anyone else's ideology of what I can be. That's everything. That's just everything.
Thank you so much. It's a great article. So essentially it's saying that the representation of people that look like us in the world is not only how people perceive us, but it actually is how we perceive ourselves. And I feel like with a medium like podcasting, or the podcast platform, we have that availability right in our hands to produce a show, to produce our thoughts, to be represented out there. Because another project that I have is I have a YouTube channel, and it's quite interesting. My biggest demographic is out of Singapore, because
they see somebody doing something they've always seen somebody do, but somebody that looks like them. So, question for the panelists here is, has representation played a role for you in what you do, and how important is representation in the space of what you do? Mike, I'm sorry, you're a white male, but you're my token white male. So.
And I look like all the other white males too, so it doesn't help at all. Every day. It's kind of interesting, especially from the white male perspective. Like, my voice is out there far too much in way too many facets, but at the same time, my voice is could be different than so many other white males out there as well. And I may not think the same way, may not have that, but being able to voice that for me has been paramount, just because I try to look at things outside the box. My training in life has been in the automotive industry. I was a diesel mechanic for a number of years, so I've been very much in problem solving, doing those kinds of things, working with my hands and trying to get to the grassroots of whatever that issue may be. And providing that perspective has really helped me in life, helped me get certain jobs that I never would have had, or being able to communicate with people that I never would have been able to otherwise, just because of my perspective, because I'm a very I wouldn't say outgoing, but I have no problem with voicing my opinion on things. And being able to do that has really helped me in showing that not all white guys are the same.
Exactly.
I think that on my show, consciously, I don't think my background influenced my choosing it, but as I think about it, the way that I get treated, because when I was a kid, there were two stereotypes for Asian men in media. One is the martial artist, and the other one is the nerd.
I agree.
And I don't do martial arts, right? But I remember, and I like to think that I came to this on my own, because I genuinely love the things that I love. But I also realized that, maybe the reason that I jumped into math and technical things is because I did have some external pressure. My little sister is very not like me, and I remember when she had the same elementary school teacher and said, I am so excited to have, and this was a conversation to my mother, who's white. I'm so excited to have your daughter in my class because Asians are just so good at math. And my sister is terrible at math. I had to tutor her. But it's one of those things where I was always told I was good at math, and maybe at first I wasn't, but just being told that over and over, I like to think I'm good at math now. But it's the same with every other genre. So the way we're treated definitely influences the directions that we go. And like I said, martial artist or nerd, I'm not physically in the shape to be a martial artist unless you count sumo. And so that left me nerd for the way that people treated me. And I'll be honest, I've embraced it and I am happy with that.
Right. Great, thanks for sharing that. Quick question for the audience here. I want to do a quick Q&A with our panelists here, but I want to keep it at yes or no questions, and if you could tweet it to me, that would be easier. Make them embarrassing, make them funny, make them deep. You can tweet at me at Roger Saying Tweets, and sorry, these kind of erased in my car. I brought little yes or no panels for you to answer these questions. But let me open up. What is it called? Twitter? That's what the kids are using these days?
Yeah.
Okay.
These young ones.
These young ones, yes.
Can't do it.
Well, Roger, while you're pulling that up,
Yes.
one of the things that you said that really struck home to me was not all white guys are the same, but not all Asians are the same, not all black people, not all women are the same. We all have different points of view. Mike, a few months ago, there was an article that my family saw about this little girl who had a Japanese-themed birthday party that was just not correct at all. But somebody posted saying, well, here's the Japanese person's response to it. And
Yeah.
it was not, and even in my own family, we were divided on how that happened. So you can't just look at Branden and say, oh, that's the Asian dude. Because Roger and I'm sure will argue over topics. You know, it's
that's a good
it's
point.
not always. I'm not definitively speaking for all Japanese men,
Yes.
but I do have a perspective informed by being a Japanese man.
TV news does that all the time. Let me get a quote from the Islamic Center. It's
Yes.
just like
Yes.
one person trying to represent the whole population. Wow, that's eye-opening. Thank you for sharing that.
So far, no questions. Any verbal questions you guys have?
I had to follow you guys first.
Oh, sorry. I forgot to introduce that in the beginning.
What's your handle again?
Roger Sang tweets. I know, Roger Sang was taken. Bastard.
What?
And there yes and
There's
no
two of
onlys,
you?
right?
Yes or no was short answer, but I think yes or no would be fun because there's a good panel up here. Yeah, to Roger Sang tweets, and if you guys want me to, I could read who it's from, or if
William,
you want
any
to.
questions? Any questions?
He's a cute kid. He's our youngest podcaster. William, thanks for coming, buddy. Real quick, while you guys are tweeting, I kind of wanted to avert attention from ourselves real quick. Has anyone in here listened to the Cold podcast?
No.
Susan? Okay. Well, I was going to bring up Chris because Chris Jones is from our local 2 News channel, and he played an integral role, is that a real word, in the investigation of Susan Powell's murder. And so I wanted to kind of give it up to Chris for being here with us today. Okay, question. Is that a question to me? Okay, question for everybody here. Does your avatar look like you? And it's to Eva, from Eva. Avatar, yes. Your Twitter avatar, does it look like you?
No, not your Twitter avatar. Your avatar, the person who you are speaking to when you do one of your podcasts, to stay on my own message, is that person you're talking to. When you picture them in your mind,
Oh, interesting.
curious.
That's a good question. Thank you, Eva. I like that.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, mine looks like me. So, yeah.
But
How
does that relate to
It
diversity?
changes the,
Because that's
conversation that you're trying to have. With you were on radio, I was on radio. We're taught that you're talking to one person. You're not talking to a crowd. It's always you you're talking to. You're always a singular thing you're trying to. And it's always best in mind if you have one person in mind. If you try to appeal to everyone, then you actually wind up putting no one, right? So you want to laser that focus in. So it's pretty common, especially in marketing, to have an avatar, the person that you're thinking of, and you name that person. You can say exactly how old they are, and how many kids they have, where they went to school, and what they drive. And more detail you get, and that's the person that you're talking. That's the avatar you were shooting for. I'm just curious.
It's a really good
persona,
question,
yeah.
and I think that's dangerous as well, because there isn't just one person, and especially when on Fox 13, it's a pretty big platform. I think I have to, this is how I think, boil it down to the most human, because we forget that there are humans with disabilities, single parents, traditional, what we think of it as a family, and there's so many types of human, but we're all human. So in my mind, that's the struggle every day, is trying to present the talker in the most human way, and then it's hard to visualize that person. When I say no, I'm not talking to myself. I shuffle through every day, or try to, of who could be watching, and that's maddening. But I think it's also important, because there isn't just one person you're talking to, and I don't want to alienate people.
Right. I want a question for everybody here. Raise your hand. Do you create your podcast because it's therapeutic for you, or your content because it's therapeutic for you?
Yes.
Love it.
Good.
Love it. Okay.
Saves your marriage.
It saved my marriage.
Wow.
Because it's tearing mine apart. Just kidding. We're good. So this comes from the Happiness Abound podcast, Taylor. And sorry, we're running short here, but we're getting there. Do you believe modern podcasts represent diversity of thought versus race?
That's a tough question.
Yeah, you gotta answer
I'm
this
trying
one
to make
right.
it yes or no. Sorry.
No,
this
it's
is-
a
this
great
is good.
question.
This is good.
That's the thing. Like diversity of thought and race, because everybody comes with their own background. And like we were saying, it's not just like one person speaking for a whole group. I mean, granted, I'm probably the newest here when it comes down to podcasting because mine hasn't been released yet. And, you know, looking at it, wanting to have, mine's an interview based, obviously, because I'm talking to different people about their dating experiences, things like that. But being able to have different people on there that bring that perspective, for me is paramount. That's the only way that mine would actually work. I can't just be like, okay, we're going to interview all the LDS people here in Utah, which there's a huge abundance of. All of them, every single one of them.
Right.
It's just not going to work. But so I myself, I don't bring a whole lot of diversity because I'm just me, but the podcast does just because I'm talking to so many different people.
You do bring diversity because it is you.
I'm a white guy. I mean,
It depends where you
So
are.
you're
Both of us are still diverse.
yeah.
I mean, if you think of any race as a monolith, I think that's kind of what we need to get past.
Get past generalization.
But to exclude somebody because of what they are defeats the whole purpose of a diversity conversation. You have to have every voice at the table. And perhaps the situation is that one voice is louder than the others, but that does not lessen its importance, but it's important for everybody to have a seat at the table and talk, otherwise we're wasting our time.
But it has to be a conscious decision to bring people to the table
It
because
does.
it's easy not to.
Yeah.
It
It
is
does.
so
Attention.
easy not to pick that. In the comic book field, so easy for me to go find a 30-year-old white guy who has opinions on things. And I'm starting to do an interview series because oddly enough in my niche, there aren't very many nerd interview shows. Everywhere else there is a ton, so I'm like, well, I can just steal from everybody else. I started interviewing people and I realized, I got 2 white dudes. All right. And so I consciously made the decision, next interview is going to be a woman. Then I've consciously made the decision, I've got people with different racial backgrounds. Because minority isn't necessarily about a race or a number. It's about your representation. You can be the majority in an area, but if you're not represented, you're a minority. It's about power. It's about, do you have the power to change things? And then you can talk about diversity and the difference in thought there. But you need to be able to bring minorities to the table, like you said, or else, and if you don't have the power, it's hard to get a seat at the table. So people who do have that power have to consciously think about it.
Thank you. Thank you all for your comments. I want to thank our panel for taking their Saturday to be here with us and you as well. In closing, I kind of wanted to bring this up. It's a big week for us. I'm glad that the podcast festival is today because 5 days ago, what was 5 days ago?
Martin Luther King Day.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day. I have to say the whole thing. I'm very... I don't know if you knew this, but when Dr. King was giving his speech, and I don't know if... I'll tell you this story about this gospel singer, Mahalia Jackson. You know the story? Okay, good. Mahalia Jackson was this gospel singer that would go to speeches with Dr. King and get to know him better and better. And so she heard his speeches here and there, and every now and then he would sprinkle in something about a dream he had. Well, when he was there in Washington giving his I Have a Dream speech, 6 months prior to that, JFK gave a speech based on the Bible, the Constitution, and the Declaration. And Dr. King decided to form his talk that same way. He got through part of his talk, it was about 5 minutes through. There was nothing written about a dream. About 50 feet away, Mahalia Jackson was sitting there. And she said, "Tell him about the dream, Martin. Tell him about the dream." And he looked over and saw her. You could see this in the video. I've seen it. He pushes the paper to the side. His body posture changes. And he starts the I Have a Dream speech. The reason I bring that up with you is because that voice that you have a Mahalia Jackson of your own, whether it be a spouse or a friend or that voice inside your head telling you to share your dream with the world. I want you guys to share your dream with the world through your podcast mediums and the mediums that you create because your story is important. So, thank you for your time.
I got 2 more. And it's not just the